Rebooted Cardinals fans. He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome into the Redbird Reboot. We've got Blake and Marcos back here to talk Arizona Cardinals. Right now, the NFL Combine is in full swing. A lot of news, a lot of reviews to get into with that. A lot of comments from Jonathan Gannon and Monty Ossenfort. And before we get to it all with my co-host here, Marcos, how are you doing today, sir? And have you paid any attention to the Combine this year with just the lack of stars participating? Some guys have really been blowing it up. It's just a very unique sort of year. How are you doing amidst it all, sir?
Well, now I just don't really give too much attention to the combine, especially because of what you just said. There's not many people performing, and people know that they're going top 5 or top 10. Most of the time, they're not even going to try to they're not even going to entertain the ability to be able to put something out there that's really either going to tank their stock or just going to put more question marks. Obviously, the number one person that we have in our minds is Caleb Williams. He's getting a lot of flack for not participating, and I saw a clip of somebody just asking him a brutal question before he even gets to the stand, and I'm like, oof. I mean, it's pretty obvious he's going to be top 2 at the very least. So I don't know if that's going to be a situation. And plus, Kyler Murray didn't really participate much in the combine either because he knew he was going number 1 overall. So it's just a thing that's hey, we know where he's going. He doesn't need to prove anything, and it's not about a competition type of thing. So, man, it is what it is, and we're going to see people running the 40s, in the 4.2s or 4.3s, and they're going to obviously, move down a couple rounds and then completely bypass the whole, hey, technique, anything having to do with, actual, with, game film and whatnot. So it is what it is. It's always like that.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's get into the Combine news and reviews as far as the biggest update. And let's start by kind of taking a look at the top, which of course is with Caleb Williams not participating in anything with the Combine. He did measure in, came in a bit over 6'1". Most people anticipated that he was going to be coming in either at 6 foot or under. We've seen in the last couple of years, guys like Kyler, Bryce Young, others have all kind of stuck out. It's a very interesting setup where he doesn't have an agent. There's been obviously some questions about what's going to happen with him, and it feels like, Marcos, he's essentially stuck at the number 1 overall pick, and that we'll soon see Justin Fields traded from the Bears. There's been nothing so far at the Combine that seems to refute that. There's going to be obviously a lot of debate leading up to it, and people can wonder, did Caleb hurt his stock, or was there even any stock he could have hurt it by not participating in a lot of these sort of exercises? He still has obviously been meeting with teams from what it sounds like, and he will weigh in and work out his pro day. What's bigger, I think, for a lot of people is the seemingly, maybe not unanimous, but overwhelming favoritism toward Jaden Daniels going with the 2nd overall pick. That's something that I find interesting given how his age, his size. I kind of like Drake May a bit better for the most part. He is somewhat seemed to have cooled off for the most part, which is very interesting to me. And then that leads us then, of course, to that 3rd overall pick just in front of Arizona. And it seems very, maybe not, I would say likely, but a lot of comments have been very much coming out of New England with the Patriots seemingly ready to invest in a free agent quarterback, to invest in a quarterback with the number 3 overall pick, and essentially redo that room, which of course, Marcos, would mean that number 4 overall pick for the Arizona Cardinals would seem to indicate that Marvin Harrison Jr. would be available for them. Thoughts on how this top three is played out? Do you think that we're in a place where this is going to shift before the draft, or are we kind of looking at this potential of the Cardinals being able to get their top guy?
Well, like, so the interesting thing is going to be who's going to try to move up to try to get those one of those top three quarterbacks. It's going to be one of those years where like the top three picks are going to be most likely quarterbacks, and who's going to trade out, who's going to switch up, what's going to happen. So I like Jaden Daniels at number 2, mostly because that that means that Washington's going to invest in a quarterback that they feel like Cliff Kingsbury can work with because of the mobility of Jaden Daniels and because of the talent that he has. So they probably feel like, hey, let's not get a statue in there like a Drake May. He's not really a statue, but he's a
Mhm.
statuesque type of quarterback. Pocket quarterback, big armed. Those prototypical Justin Herbert type of quarterbacks that you're talking about with Drake May. He's better suited to go to New England. And I really hope they do, because
Mhm.
at that point they're looking towards like, do we want Drake May and restart this whole reboot, or do you want to hitch your wagon to Mac Jones, who you've seen he has good processing speed, but he doesn't have the talent around him, and he's not the type of person that just elevates the team by himself. He needs the talent around him to be able to elevate. So that would make me feel really good. If they all stand pat and these quarterbacks go, then I feel really good about getting Marvin Harrison Jr. at the number 4. Although I would say that if he's not there, I don't feel really bad about being able to trade back anymore, mostly because
Hmm.
I I'm not gonna lie, I saw Brett Coleman's video of Roma Dunze, and I thought to myself, well, that's what we need in our team. So I'm like, oh man, like Roma Dunze is like he's a little underdog here.
Yeah, he's very interesting. That's one of the players who's going to be working out tomorrow, catching passes from the quarterbacks who are throwing. None of the top three quarterbacks are throwing at all, which I think is one of the cases where I feel like at the combine may end up being almost on its way out. I don't know if the combine is dying necessarily, but I do think that it is somewhat in decline. The reason why this is the case is because if you're at the top of the draft, and we even have seen this with several players, guys who run a 40, guy ran a 4.29 40-yard dash, feels something pop, and then he's out. You don't know if it's going to miss time, missing the rest of the process. There's a lot of guys who used to get ready for the combine to be able to show up and show off. And what's really changed is a lot of guys have essentially just decided to say, you know what? There's a process where guys are starting to just measure chips inside of the players to track speed. Guys are doing a lot of these combine workouts in the early off season before they even play their final year. And that's one of the reasons why Marvin Harrison Jr. is not doing anything at the combine. Like, he's essentially not weighing in at all. He didn't even show up for his interview. Reportedly, he at least was doing a medical recheck, thanks to, if you believe, Chris Carter, the former wide receiver, I think most known for being with the Minnesota Vikings. But it was very interesting to me that Harrison Jr. was like, oh, yeah, most people, you're like, he won't do workouts here. He'll do it at his pro day. Malik Neighbors chose not to weigh in. He's going to weigh in at his pro day. A guy like Brock Bowers, one of the top, if not the consensus tight end one, decided that he's going to weigh in at the combine, but he's not going to run. So you're like, okay, is he just going to like weigh in at the combine at 246? And then he's going to run at his pro day. Is he going to weigh in at his pro day? No, he's not going to weigh in at his pro day. So that way you can kind of put your best foot forward, making it seem like you may be a bigger and faster guy than you are. These are all areas where we've seen over the past few years the combine's importance was putting everyone on the same track, on the same field, being able to have kind of a consistent process where you could see how athletes would stack up against each other. And it feels like, unfortunately, Marcos, we're not seeing as many of the top guys go out there and be able to really show out. The top quarterback throwing this year is JJ McCarthy out of Michigan, who probably is going to be the fourth quarterback selected. At earliest, it would be the third. Do you think that the NFL Combine, as it is still important for a lot of these prospects, where we want to see a Marvin Harrison Jr. workout, where you'd rather see guys like a Caleb Williams go through that whole process? Or do you think that this isn't as affecting of their draft stock with where we are now, kind of in this new college rules, new NFL type of place where players are just kind of saying, you know what? I'm going to kind of do my own control of the process. And teams just have to kind of abide by it and draft guys anyway.
I think because of the NIL and the implementation of what the NIL is, like college, players have more power than they used to, and they have the ability to be able to negotiate. Meaning that it's no longer a situation where you want to get into the NFL as soon as you possibly can, and you want to get drafted. Obviously, you want to get drafted highest possible.
Hmm.
So the combine used to be a tool to be able to do that. We've seen players be able to skyrocket their stock because of their performance at the combine. Oh, this guy like CJ Henderson ran a 4.43 or a four, like a high low 4.3s, high 4.2s. Okay, now he's looking at like, instead of being about top in the second round, now he's in the first round being drafted top 10 to a team that needed a corner, and unfortunately he got drafted that high, not really being his fault, but he showed out at the combine with his 40 time. And so you have other instances as well that we've seen where players skyrocket their performance just because of that 40-yard dash. So people are starting to get smarter. Players are starting to get smarter. They're
Hmm.
starting to look at the combine and thinking to themselves, this guy looked really good. He really was able to unlock his hips when he had to turn and do this drill. We have our own experiences of seeing our own defensive back and Patrick Peterson like completely blow the combine out. He didn't need to. He was already seen as CB1, but he goes out to perform in the combine, and we could see those clips. He looked just amazing. He had just a little tidbit of stuff that he needed to work on, but like people were just like, yeah, he's definitely going top 5. So in some instances, it's not as important as it used to be. It's one of those situations where these no names or these like bottom tier like players can help their stock so that they can be able to get drafted higher, or at least get themselves drafted by going to
Hmm.
the combine. But the people that like the players that know that they're going in the first round, even in the second round, a lot of these guys are either weighing their options of saying like, do I even need to perform? And more has been put not only on coaching but on the film. So
Yeah.
they're watching them playing, and then they're watching them and how they perform on film, and then they're getting more information from that. Can this guy do this? Can this guy do that? And that's
Yep.
why the interviews are so important. That's why they still do the interviews. They get all that together, and then let's just say they have a pro day. They take whatever they can from the pro day, and pro days are controlled, of course. And you make your assessment from there. But the combine is now being a situation where like now you're having like these bottom tier players taking that situation serious, or like that performance serious of how they do in the combine, so that they can put their names out there.
Absolutely. And the way that it works, obviously, like we said, is it's kind of like the NFL's version of The Bachelor. There's guys who have stock up, stock down. A lot of times people will make up their minds from the get-go, and then we'll see at least a lot of just drama that can follow over the next few months until finally things kind of end up with how we thought they were going to be, at least as far as the first round is concerned overall. One thing also, I think at least that we can mention with looking at um, some of the news, at least that's coming out of the top, has been the rise of JJ McCarthy, the fact that there is a fourth quarterback, at least, that seems to be pushing and skyrocketing into the top 10. This also kind of goes along with this comment here from Jeff Howe from The Athletic that there's a strong sense around the NFL. Patriots are heavily leaning in the direction of drafting a quarterback with the number 3 pick, per sources. To me, this makes the most amount of sense because you don't have a quarterback right now, and you're probably not going to be picking as high again next year. You don't even know what the quarterback class looks like next year. Last year, obviously, we can talk at least about how a team like the Commanders was picking where they probably could have gone after a quarterback last year. Instead, they went, nope, we're just going to sit pat. We're going to wait for a little while. And I think that this is one of the places where it'll be very interesting to figure out how that final order shakes out. Every year it feels like, Marcos, there's a little difference in quarterbacks where sometimes you'll see a guy go, hey, it's going to go, these two guys go 1-2. We saw that last year with Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Sometimes the order can end up flipping around for the most part. That's one of the things where, as Joe Burrow's meteoric rise put him over to a Tagovailoa for some people. And then as that draft process went along, it became much more clear. This is going to be an interesting one. The 2021 NFL draft saw Trevor Lawrence as the obvious number 1 pick, similar to Caleb Williams. but it was Zach Wilson and Trey Lance that went 2 and 3. They are both kind of on the outs quarterbacks. Justin Fields, even though he maybe has been more productive than Trey Lance, and I would say Zach Wilson even as well, he's kind of on the outs as well to a new potential team. There have been some rumblings about the Atlanta Falcons being interested in him. I'm very curious to see how that will play out. Do you feel like, Marcos, at least with the Patriots, while they're leaning heavily toward the drafting of a number 3 quarterback, that's not final. It's not decided that it's going to be 1, 2, 3. I think the question then for the Arizona Cardinals, of course, is do you take an offer to move back? What teams could be moving up? Could be the Giants, from what we've heard. Could be a team like the Falcons if they decide that they want to be able to bring in Justin Fields and get a quarterback. It could be also a team such as the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders. One of the areas that's very curious to me, Marcos, and this is something that I've kind of suspected, is we have heard in several places, different podcasts, that there are teams that are wanting to trade up, and there are teams that are wanting to trade up with particularly the Arizona Cardinals. And I think the reason for that is because there's a lot of talk about how the Chargers want to take Joe Alt. They may want to trade back. There's also a lot of questions about, could you be getting an offer that you may not be able to refuse? I think that's probably the question I'd say, Marcos, is a lot of Cardinals fans are like, all right, let's say Marvin Harrison Jr. is on the board. You're Monty Austin for it. You get a phone call. What is kind of the price that you would need to get? How far back would you maybe want to go in order to be able to essentially justify leaving him behind, moving back a little bit? Or do you feel like this is if he's there at 4, you got to take him no matter what type of move?
Well, as usual, it all depends on the team, but I would say like 2 first-round picks at the very least. That would have to be the price, because now I know I've been talking highly about Marvin Harrison Jr., and the reason why is mostly because of the family lineage. I'm not going to go ahead and say that that's not a factor. I do believe that because he was born to a future Hall of Famer, Marvin Harrison, who was not just a good like route runner, he was a good hands wide receiver. So instilling like these type of techniques early on in his small career to be able to get to the point where now he's in college, and his dad like being able to be one of the best receivers in the league for the longest time for a quarterback like Peyton Manning. And I saw what Marvin Harrison did as well, and he was amazing. So he's everything that we need in a wide receiver for the moment right now. So that price would have to be steep, or else it's not going to be worth it. Is it going to be a situation where maybe somebody from the 20s might trade in, or like might want to move up? I wouldn't even take that risk, and I wouldn't even hear those offers, because if they're picking in the 20s, most likely they will be picking in the 20s. We don't want to repeat of what happened last year. Last year, when Monty Ossenford made the trade with the Texans, we were all praising him and talking about how this is a steal. This was going to be great. We have a certified top 5 pick, and I'm not going to name who posted a tweet about like a preseason game when it came to like what the Texans were going to do, but he was going to deliver the number 1 overall pick because C.J. Stroud threw an interception. And I was like, don't talk yet, because the season still needs to play out. And now we're picking in the 20s again. We don't want a repeat of that. We don't want to make a trade with somebody who's potentially going to use Marvin Harrison to get themselves in a position to be having us pick in the 15s or in the 20s, because that's just going to be a loss. So that's why my price would be super steep, and I wouldn't even like entertain any calls unless it's somebody that we cannot say no to. Like, let's just say somebody like a Max Crosby's on the board, or like on the trading block, or like even like, hey, I know Justin Jefferson's up for a contract. Maybe we might finagle some business at. I mean, I would say I'm willing to hear, but I don't know if I'm willing to make that trade. But it has to be a steep price tag. If not, then stay pat. Take what you know is going to be good.
Yeah, I think that there is a limit to being able to constantly trade back. At some point, there's a recognition that, we don't know how players will pan out. Like, even the guy who seems to be the most bust-proof prospect ever, can still ultimately maybe underperform or maybe not live up to expectations. And being able to overinvest, like as we've seen some teams have done before, the Colts with their general manager and with Andrew Luck are a great example, because that was a team that had talent at receiver, at tight end. For a while, they had a pretty decent defense with Chuck Pagano, but they really did not invest into the offensive line. They ended up drafting a receiver in the first round when they kind of had 3 receivers already, and it wasn't a good pick either. So you want to make sure that when you are essentially being that type of team that's building players and prospects, you also want to make sure you're not passing on top talent. I think last year the Cardinals looked at Will Anderson and were like, hey, we're a ways away. I think they looked at DJ Humphries getting up there in age and wanted to get an offensive tackle, not just for the future, but someone who could help them now, which is part of why they moved up for a Paris Johnson Jr. versus just kind of sitting put at pick 12 when they traded back with the Texans. I think that I also agree with you that they probably could have traded that second first round pick from the Texans if they had got that pick a little bit higher. Maybe it's a little easier to trade for a proven talent. Now you're probably looking at that being, it's maybe a little bit too late to trade for one of those proven guys. Does the fact that the Raiders kind of hired Antonio Pierce as the main guy, does that keep a guy like a Max Crosby there? Does Justin Jefferson re-up with the Minnesota Vikings? And does Kirk Cousins, does he go to a team like Atlanta? Does he stay put in Minnesota and that convinces Justin Jefferson to sign? A lot of what we're talking about with this draft isn't going to even be resolved until free agency. And I think it's important to be able to just accept things for where they are right now with this Cardinals team, while also recognizing that, you know what, it's probably going to be best if you stay put. There's a lot of different ways I could say, well, maybe what if the Giants trade up to number 4 and the Chargers, they're going to take a tackle at that spot. Maybe you could say you could trade back with Atlanta. You get some picks. Now you trade back up to pick number 5. There's a lot of different possibilities. And I think it's fun to dream about the Cardinals being able to get Marvin Harrison Jr. and 3 to 4 picks. But in practice, you first have to know that he's going to be there. It's a long off season. We'll have to see. You never know who's going to be on the board unless you're picking at number 1 come draft night. And even though this is more of a chalk type of draft where a lot of people are saying that the first 4, maybe even 5 picks are kind of locked in, I do agree with you that this is one of those opportunities you have as a Cardinals general manager to get probably the best player in the draft, at least as a prospect coming in a position of need, a guy who, from everything we've heard, already loves Kyler Murray's game, and be able to take that step on offense in what's a pretty offensive-heavy draft. Despite the Cardinals' solid run game last year, they were not a great passing team, and I think that you can't really pass up a guy like a Marvin Harrison Jr. If you're believing in sort of like whether it's fate or destiny or just the circumstances, it will be about 20 years to the day. I believe it's actually day 2 of the NFL draft since the Cardinals drafted Larry Fitzgerald Jr. at number 3 overall in the 2004 NFL draft. It'll be almost exactly 20 years later. That's one of those places where sometimes things just happen to line up, like Matt Prater makes that one of those last 2 kicks. We're not talking about it. Other things that seem to be lining up as well are just the way that the offensive tackle class has been set up. We're going to be seeing a lot of these guys, such as Joe Alt. We've seen some guys in Pelis Fuaga at least seem to have his stock rising. Olu Fashanu is very athletic. There is another set of needs for the Arizona Cardinals that is popped up in addition to these offensive tackles, and that's the pass rushers. Some of these pass rushers have also been blowing up the combine, such as the likes of Dallas Turner is obviously one that we can talk about in a little bit. There's other guys like Jared Verse. There's a really unique opportunity, I think at least, for the Arizona Cardinals that had been if one of those pass rushers would fall. Now, Marcos, it seems like that's a lot less likely to happen. And as a result, now with the Arizona Cardinals, you may have a few more decisions to be able to make. This is one thing that I know popped up, at least for a lot of people had seen here. This is Monty Ossenfort after the 4.47 40 time from Alabama's Dallas Turner. This is the guy who replaced Will Anderson. And NFL camera cuts to him on NFL Network. Monty Osborne's like, "Ooh, that's good. That's good." That's one of those places where some people went, "Oh, is that the guy who's going at number 4 now? Could that be one of those guys?" I think someone even mentioned at least a meme that talked about how um, the Monty Austin Ford is looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. and then maybe someone ends up actually like looking at it a little bit differently. One example at least would be here is there you got Monty Austin Ford. Marvin Harrison's like, and he's the one looking at Dallas Turner. I at least from what people we know of would not expect the general manager to make a decision just based off of those vibes or how a camera caught him looking. It is really funny to think about and kind of interesting, though, that this is going to be a different Cardinals staff than the likes of what we've seen under Steve Keim. There's also a huge need for a pass rusher. Cardinals got 1 sack in the last, I believe it was 6 games of the season. It was accredited to Dennis Gardeck, and it wasn't even a sack. It was a quarterback running out of bounds. Like, it was a huge need for the Cardinals. They also were run on a lot last year. This is going to be very interesting, I think, to be able to see, Marcos, just how the Cardinals stack up their needs, especially as we head into free agency, because some of those positions like defensive line or edge rusher, you might be able to address them by signing guys, and all of a sudden you're looking at a different need in the draft.
There we go. I'm always like, oh, I'm about to talk and I have my thing on mute. Anyways, so one of the things I was gonna mention that it's weird that like when it comes to like outside linebacker or defensive end, that the 40 time actually does matter. So having him have that reaction to Dallas Turner running in the 4.4s, that's kind of like, hey, he kind of knows the business. Hey, when you have an outside linebacker that runs that fast, it could show that he has some like not only some speed with his game, but he has some good reaction time and to be able to get off the line that quick. So that is one thing that I would say, like, yeah, you're good for getting it. Like you getting that type of reaction to seeing somebody run that fast. It's like a defensive end or like an outside linebacker. That's a good reaction because it at least shows that you know what you're scouting for. Yes, it's a different regime as we've said before. And even though like I'm not gonna go harp on like what Steve Keim did with the inside linebackers because it's not their fault they got drafted that high. It's just him trying to like replicate that Daryl Washington, Carlos Dansby dynamic duo that we had back in 2013. So he thought he could replicate that. And the problem was that he did it in a situation where he had no staff members that could develop or even commit to these players. So that was a mistake on his part to draft them into that situation. So it is true when it comes to like defensive tackle and edge rusher, he really didn't like supplement those picks the way he should have, especially that and cornerback. So he didn't do his job and didn't draft them high where, the talent starts dropping off. He thought he could like replace those players with like maybe like a 3rd round or 4th round, like a flyer, like, hey, this guy's talented. So let's see if we can get this guy to come in and he could be a steal in this draft. Didn't quite work out like he planned to, and that left a hole in that position that we're still trying to fill. And when it came to like situations like, so like I've been doing a lot of research when it comes to the offensive tackles. That's one area where people, get on him for, but he in his record, I believe he's drafted, I think it's like 2 offensive tackles in the top. Not the
like
top 10. One
I
in
was
the
going to
top
say
10
it
and
was
one in the first round.
the top
It was DJ
120. Jonathan Cooper.
Yeah, Jonathan Cooper was the offensive guard that he drafted in 7th overall, and then he drafted DJ Humphries 26, which I like that pick. And we can't argue that pick was a bust because maybe his career didn't get off to a good start, but he's been good as a like offensive lineman. He's been better than what we would have expected with this, team that can't develop tackles for some reason. But I would take a little bit of pause when it comes to like the offensive linemen in the next couple of years, because doing that research, I found out that like it's really just it's really like throwing darts at a board. You're gonna hit on some first round linemen. It's always gonna be like 1 or 2 that are just gonna either play solid or play at an all pro level. And then from there, it's just gonna be all up on the situation. How well do you develop them? Their backs are against the wall when it comes to like the practice time, because it's not giving them enough time and enough experience to be able to develop better. So at least we got our lumps in with Paris Johnson. I think it's a waste that he's still at right tackle. Please move him to left already. Stop
Mm.
like messing up with his career because you're gonna start him at the wrong trajectory if you have him at right tackle and he was a left tackle in college and he played better on the left side. You want to get your strongest people to play at the strongest position. So I don't know. Like when it comes to like offensive tackle, that second first round pick is as far high as I'll go with them. But after that, I think we would just need to find a new right tackle and move him over. Edge rusher for that second first round pick, I would 100% be on board for that. I'm gonna tell you something just really quick and see what you
Mm.
think about this.
Yeah.
And I've always thought about this, so I have no idea what the logistics are about this certain player and individual because I'm not paying attention to salaries right now. I'm just focusing on free agency. What would you think if we traded that second first round pick for TJ for AJ Terrell?
Mm. I think that would be interesting to look at. I would be very curious. It depends on what the Falcons are going to do. I think that if you are able to get that trade taken care of and then be able to pay him, you have cap space this year. He's one of those guys that, at least with how the defense has been laid out, it's going to be interesting. If he doesn't fit Raheem Morris's defense, I think that's fine. I think a lot of it also comes to, do you want to try to build up through getting in the front of the line, the kind of building that 3-4-4-3 defense, maybe you're shifting, or do you need to address the secondary? I think that is a huge thing to be able to figure out. And the fact that AJ Terrell, he is, I believe, right now he's entering his last year, essentially. He's had 4 seasons for the most part that he's been able to be there. There is, of course, a 5th-year option, I believe, that was picked up for him entering into 2024. It would be very similar, in my opinion, to when you made the DeAndre Hopkins type of trade, or if you wanted to look at um, essentially I suppose you could say, at least for the long-term contract, the Falcons are in an interesting spot because they have a lot of the money to be able to pay an AJ Terrell. They are either going to, however, be having to kind of draft a quarterback, maybe even trade up if they're not able to get into, one of the top 3 picks. Then there's only one quarterback for you. May have to look at, are you going to get a Justin Fields type of player who's still going to be on that rookie contract, or do you go after a Kirk Cousins to be able to bring him in, kind of win now with some of that offensive talent? I think that may determine their ability to keep AJ Terrell or not. It's going to be very interesting, I think, to see what the Falcons do. They would be probably the most, I would say, pivot point of teams in the NFL, because I think the Steelers, unless the Steelers decide to go all in on Kirk Cousins, and it doesn't seem like that's maybe their style, it just doesn't feel like they're the sort of team that would go all in trying to be able to say, hey, we need to get this Super Bowl, let's set up. They just have been much more patient. I think that I would say, yeah, you would want to be able to trade for him. He's a 26-year-old player. I've seen other Cardinals fans who wondered, could you be able to even say, hey, would you trade that number 4 overall pick if the Denver Broncos were like, we need a quarterback, we love JJ McCarthy, we want to trade up? Would you take a Patrick Surtain for the number 4 overall pick? And I think there'd be Cardinals fans who would look at that and go, boy, like, you'd be kind of getting maybe the best cornerback in the NFL, but you'd be passing up a Marvin Harrison Jr. It's still kind of that proven commodity. You'd have to pay for him. At the end of the day, I think what we saw with Steve Keim was they would trade for proven commodities, and usually it would be a success. The Chandler Jones trade is the first thing people think of, where the Cardinals were able to get that. I think the biggest difference here is, I don't know if he's going to be available. I think if they say, hey, you could have a rookie who's at the end of the first round, maybe it's going to be a Jerzan Newton, maybe it's going to be an Ernie Rakestraw, maybe it'd be a Tyler Guyton ends up being there. Or you could go with an AJ Terrell. I think it's pretty easy to say, yeah, go with the AJ Terrell. The question, I think, is he going to be available? And that's the hard part, I think, a lot of times, Marcos, is we can always talk about looking at trading for veteran players, but other times we've seen with the cap number going up higher this year, we expected the cap to be somewhere around probably 230 million, and it's gone up to about 250, 255. You're going to have teams that have a lot more room to re-sign their own players as a result. And so I think a guy like AJ Terrell, who may have been available previously, because of that extra cap room, he just might not be available now versus getting extended by the Atlanta Falcons.
I'm gonna start the train right now because that is a player that I believe is underrated as
Mhm.
like as much as he had a down year last year, but that's a lot saying for a player like him who's an all pro status type of corner. I've been watching his game against the Cardinals as like I mentioned to you, I'm clipping all of Kyler Murray's throws and I watching that Atlanta game like he was just a dominant like a force and stuff like nobody that like everybody that was being like pretty much like anybody that AJ Terrell was taking instantly made that throw not only difficult but he made that throw almost impossible because of how sticky he is and how he understands leverage. So I'm like, oh boy, wouldn't that guy be really great in our cornerback room? Because right now we need somebody to be able to like come in and be an all pro type of player and be a leader to these DBs that we have, these young DBs who, they could be like the type of DBs that might be starting DBs and maybe even Pro Bowl DBs if we are able to develop them the right way. But we need somebody now. We need somebody to be able to go in there and help. I'm tired of throwing these young guys to the wolves and whatnot and expecting them to like either
Mhm.
swim or sink or swim. Most of the time they sink and then they end up like losing all that confidence and then it puts their career in a bad trajectory. We need somebody now that we know it's gonna be able to perform.
Yeah, there's guys at least like L'Jarius Sneed. Jalen Johnson is probably going to be under the franchise tag, not hitting free agency. You've got an older player like a Stephon Gilmore. Maybe you end up seeing the Eagles move on from one of those top two cornerbacks who's able to come in, but there is definitely a spot where they're getting up in age. And when you look at a lot of the mock drafts and the scenarios, and you're saying, well, maybe the Cardinals could get one of these cornerbacks who's their late first round to be able to say, hey, it's a young guy, but if you can in the free agency sign a veteran, bring in that young guy who can learn under him, that may be something that you could argue is a great way to build. The fact of the matter is, though, as we've seen so far, Terrian Arnold at least seems like he didn't run as fast a 40 as people had thought, but he seems to be kind of the top cornerback. Nate Wiggins ran a 4.29 ultimately, but he's a bit on the smaller side. It's hard to see him being able to plug in, but that 4.2 is probably going to put him ahead of pick 27. Quinion Mitchell looks like he might be the second best, or maybe some people have him as like the best cornerback in this draft. And there's a lot of the mock drafts you'll at least see. The only guy who seems to be kind of available in the late first is Ernie Rakestraw. I do kind of like his teammate, who's a bigger guy, about just as much. And you're talking at least about being able to address this spot for Arizona. It's going to be, I think, difficult with this year. You've got a lot of needs. The DJ Humphries injury means you need a left tackle. The fact of the matter is, you're probably going to need at least one defensive lineman, if not two. You're probably going to need an edge rusher. We haven't even talked about the fact that there's only one inside linebacker that the Cardinals seem to be able to trust, and it's Kaiser White. You put all of that together, and you suddenly now look at Buda Baker, and Buda Baker's probably going to be up for a new contract at least. If you want to re-sign him, if you're the Cardinals, do you end up looking to say, hey, we kept him through here. Now is the time to trade him, bring in another young guy with Jalen Thompson being that mentor. That would be an unpopular move for Arizona, but on the other hand, then you're probably saying, do you really want to pay Buda Baker another $14 million a year while he is one of the guys who is honestly a huge leader on the team? He's getting up there in age. There's a lot of decisions ultimately that have to be made for the Cardinals. And I think ultimately, like you said, bringing in some of these veteran players and some leaders underneath the leadership of Jonathan Gannon, I think will be huge. Now, speaking of leaders, let's use this as a transition time. We're going to talk about the Cardinals NFLPA report card. So these came back last year. Obviously, the Arizona Cardinals got a failing grade just across the board when it came to everything there. As far as for treatment of families was considered to be an F. The cafeteria food, players were being mentioned that, hey, they got a cafeteria. Guess what? Players are having to pay for dinner if they're there. The only thing that really did super well for them was the training staff that got a B overall. And this year they even had a new thing that popped up for the most part. So let's share the screen here for those of you watching here. Take a look at what Bo Brock has. Cardinals moved up this past year. They last year were 31st in the National Football League. They moved up with they added a new room for game day for family treatment, went up to a D plus. The cafeteria and food, they no longer have to pay for it. The nutritious and dietitian went up. Their locker room still rated out as an F, as people have pointed out. There are teams like the Dallas Cowboys, or even a team such as the Houston Texans that have phenomenal locker rooms. The Cardinals are probably going to be doing an upgrade to some of their training facilities. This report and came through before the Cardinals had taken all of their offices in Tempe, moved kind of this is like marketing, this would be like the sales division, this would be kind of your operations people, the business side of football. They moved them out so they could kind of get a new team facility in for the players that feels more like a football facility. The training staff actually went up a bit this year. We got to see with Buddy, who rehabbed with Kyler Murray, and Jonathan Gannon bringing in a new trainer from Cleveland. We got to see, at least at the weight room, at least was able to see some improvements. What's interesting about this, of course, was we had 2 new things popped up this year. This year, players all graded their head coach and their ownership. And Michael Bidwell, for what it's worth, ownership, he's not the lowest graded. Clark Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs actually got an F- as far as for how they felt about ownership. But the head coach, A- with Jonathan Gannon, one of the higher grades overall for the NFLPA survey. Andy Reid also, I believe, was the highest ranked as far as for head coach. That's pretty impressive overall, at least to be top 15 as far as Cardinals. Now, a lot of teams you can see, obviously, 15th with an A-. A lot of people really just like their head coach. It's just how it goes. What are some of your thoughts on the training survey? Because the Cardinals went from being 31st, they got out of the top, I should say, excuse me, the bottom 5 or the top 5 worst teams. But they also ended up still pretty low ranked. They ended up being ranked just barely outside of the bottom 5 at 27th overall. And this is something that I think, Marcos, a lot of Cardinals fans have mentioned, said, hey, doesn't matter what's going on. They're making some improvements. It still doesn't seem like it's enough. And your ownership still gets an F. I think that just seeing some movement is a positivity. And after just 1 year under Jonathan Gannon, it's good to see an A-. And this is kind of that twist of, well, how much of that is just fanboying that your team's made improvements when clearly they haven't been enough? And how much of it is being hard on a Cardinals organization that, like we said, needed a complete cultural reset and has been taking steps to do that through even just 1 year since the NFLPA survey came out?
Well, like I love the fact that they're doing this, because now we have a way to be able to hold like teams accountable for things that we as fans don't get to like actually experience, and it's the players. I do feel good that they're at least making strides towards the right direction. All these D's, I mean, it's pretty obvious that these D's and these F's, they need to come up, because it's ridiculous that we not only are we one of the teams out in the NFL that have a stadium that's like supposed to be state of the art for when it was built, and at least is one of the most like favorable stadiums like in the NFL when it comes to like how like aesthetic it is, like how like the field was rolling out, rolling in. Of course, we know the field is crap as well, but like there's a reason why the Super Bowl keeps coming back to the end, like to Glendale. It's because of the fact that like it's a great place to be able to host it, not only because of the stadium itself, but the amenities that are around it. We all know, like for people that live in the Valley, Westgate is a great place to go to if you want to watch a game, if you're trying to like tailgate and whatnot. They got those big fields and stuff, so all that stuff is great, and fan experiences for the most part is great, with the exception of the prices and what our owners doing when it comes to like the price hikes and stuff. I'm not surprised to see an F. I'm so glad that they added that to it. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty weird that like the Kansas City Chiefs have the worst owner in the NFL, essentially, when it comes to treatment. It is what it is. Like the owner doesn't always make the franchise, but in this instance, that F, like Michael Bidwell has to be looking at that F, thinking to himself, he's probably like deferring. He's probably thinking to himself, like, no, everybody tells me I'm a great owner. Everybody tells me I'm like, everybody says that they like me. Yes, they're going to say that because you're the owner. Like, Michael, get out of your bubble and realize that you're just not a good owner overall, because of the fact that how you carry yourself, but how you conduct business and the way you are as when it comes to like meddling with like team operations. You're supposed to take a step back. You're an owner. We understand that owners get protective over their assets, because that's what he sees the Cardinals as, an asset, like most owners in the NFL do. They see it as an investment asset. Like, hey, I'm not investing in this team and owning this team because I want to start tanking and losing profits. And then when I see the quarterly, reports, and I'm like, oh, we're down sales on this and this and that. Like that really goes into an owner's mindset of like, we're losing money in this aspect. What do we do to improve that?
Mhm.
Well, for him, he's going to be making decisions business wise where you can't do that in a sports type of scenario, because sports are different. Sports aren't about like you look at the paper and you look at the numbers and you make your little like adjustments here and there. You make a cut here, or you try to like invest in this little thing, but like you're going cheap on it and whatnot.
Mhm.
Like it's not like that, because you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with like philosophies, you're dealing with actual people that like not only have feelings, but
Yeah.
also things can also be a situation where a bad owner can really harpen the development of players who are coming over or players who are being signed. Like that's a big, as we saw with Robert Sarver, how many free agents wanted to come play for the Phoenix Suns?
Yeah, no, it took a overhaul that they had. They took the wrong player at the top of the draft. There's honestly a lot of commonality between the Sean McDonough era and then the time with Terry McDonough underneath Steve Keim, where there was just a lot of problems. I do agree with you that ultimately this is a place where you want to see Michael Bidwell be able to make changes. There also, of course, as people have said, may be limits. One study that came out that was really interesting showed that kind of what I would call maybe not the Matt Ishbia effect for the Phoenix Suns fans, but it showed if you're a guy who's inherited your team from your parents, it's just kind of like what Michael Bidwell has, second generation, or was maybe one of the founders of that, versus someone who bought the team. Usually, if you buy the team, you're at least in a place where you're being more willing to actually make changes, do upgrades. Maybe there's a bit more money to have it. Your money comes from elsewhere versus coming from your NFL franchise, as it is for the Bidwills. I know some people have used that as arguing that NFL teams should probably sell. I think ultimately it's one of the cases where just how the system is set up right now, it's a lot easier, honestly, if you are just someone who kind of has grown up at least amongst being an NFL owner versus one who has come in and is like, hey, don't know how this works. Let's find out how it is by hiring good people we can bring in or trusting people there. The Matt Ishby effect is something that we've seen with NFL teams and with a few others that are going to be potentially coming up for sale in the future. That does not seem to include the Arizona Cardinals at all, because, as like we've said, it's been very much one of the founding families and I should say NFL franchise owners. It's one of the places, however, where what you'd like to see would be, I'd say, that Robert Sarver effect, where he started moving toward letting operations have guys, move toward being able to let James Jones kind of firing Sean McDonough and letting a new good general manager take over and run things. And we've seen that expand even further, at least with Matt Ishby, although the results haven't necessarily gotten them to the finals yet, like we saw. That's, I think, the road for success. And what's nice is that by seeing Michael Bidwell at least being able to make some of these decisions, like having the family game day room, being able to see at least overall with the bringing in a head coach like a Jonathan Gannon, the players are giving an A grade to. I think that it is one of these steps forward for the team. Now, the other thing, at least transitioning, that we can talk here is comments at the combine. This would be stuff that was talked about from Monty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon. We'll cover at least just maybe one or two things on this before we hop into a film review. And then, Marcos, if you want, we can finish up with a very quick mock draft at the very end of it. But I know we want to be able to talk Kyler. It's kind of one of those film day games. Biggest takeaway that I had from Monty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon speaking, one that stood out to me was Gannon. He's going to continue to look for guys who love football. He also has a mentality when it comes to the defensive side. Wants aggressive corners who are going to be able to attack, wanting safeties who can kind of play that two safety high system. And then for defensive linemen, continuing to have enough depth to rotate through players. We saw Steve Keim when he would build the team, they would go very top heavy. Like, you've got a number one corner in Patrick Peterson we're trusting. We've got a number one wide receiver that we're going to get in DeAndre Hopkins. We're going to get a number one guard. We're going to sign in Justin Pugh. And a lot of times the depth would be lacking because they would invest in some of those star players, which they would need because those first round picks did not usually perform super well in the Steve Keim era. Unfortunately, the Cardinals draft capital we've even seen over the last year, they've just kind of moved on from quite a few of those players. But seeing him, how he's wanted to rotate through some defensive linemen, and then one of the other standout qualities is it feels like that they don't have as much confidence in DJ Humphries for the long term. It feels like they are, at least from the comments, I don't know if they're going to cut him necessarily. They've said complimentary things, but it does feel like they're going to be looking for a tackle to replace him. It seems like it's going to be a left tackle as well. I know that I feel like with you, Marcos, I would love to just flip Paris to that side. Maybe the question is if that will harm his development. Maybe the Cardinals want to keep him on the one side, bring in another tackle in the draft behind a veteran for a year, kind of put that, team build together. It does seem like, at least from the comments that they've said, though, they are going to be investing heavily in some of these talented players. And while they stay open at the top of the draft, there's nothing, I think, concrete that makes me think that they are going to go away from a Marvin Harrison Jr. If anything, the comments make me think that there is a new culture that they're coming in place, and they're going to be looking heavily at a tackle. I think they could be looking heavily at a cornerback, and I think I would say that they're probably going to be recognizing we got to build through the draft. Monty Ossenfort has affirmed that we cannot overpay too much in free agency. Jonathan Gannon has echoed that. And I think that the Cardinals may not sign as many guys as we think versus playing through a young team and building through that way instead.
That sounds like a sentiment from like the Steve Keim era towards the end when we were getting really upset with Steve Keim and this Cardinals team during free agency.
Trading away a third-round pick, going after Rodney Hudson, who was like 34 or something like ridiculous. They're 33 at the time. Meanwhile, you got a guy in Creed Humphreys that Kyler Murray praised that was just right there in the second round. They didn't end up getting him. Like, I agree that we're seeing that shift
that was a loss
taking place. Oh, big loss.
Yeah, I agree with you. That was a big loss. I like seeing Creed Humphrey go to the Kansas City Chiefs and have that success. I mean, I just keep loathing. It's that Wolverine meme where like I'm sitting there holding the picture of Creed Humphreys, thinking to myself, you needed a center, you still need a center, and like you have an all-pro center that was in the draft that Kyler Murray just wanted. Like I thought to myself, out of all the players that he like tries to like get the Cardinals to draft, that was one of them that I really thought was a big need for us. And I thought to myself, oh, of course we would be the team that would like trade away a pick for a guy who is a all-pro and proven commodity, but he's getting up there in age and his heart wasn't in it. And we got him for 1 year. Even that year wasn't all spectacular. He wasn't a Pro Bowl type tackle. He was a good tackle. He just wasn't Pro Bowl type, couldn't stay on the field long enough. And then we had to literally beg him to come back when I thought to myself, let's let him go. Like he was never a Cardinal. So, I mean, kudos to Creed Humphreys for having a great year. I'm still looking at you from the sideline winning those Super Bowls.
Absolutely. Oh gosh, that's tough. Well, let's shift to our film review here real quick, Marcos, going over to talk about the game that we wanted to look at, and I think that you were the one who spearheaded some of this, was Kyler's first game back against the Falcons. Was a impressive effort for the first game coming off of an ACL. A lot of, I think, at least going back and checking that out from what I saw, was not just being impressed with what Trey McBride did, but being able to see Kyler have a lot more comfort in that offense than I think that we had seen previously. So wanted at least to be able to check that out, at least for you, and take it away as far as for some of your biggest takeaways.
All right, so a lot of what I watched from this game, we're gonna cover like each game when he comes back. I'm in the process of being able to get all these throws taken care of, but obviously we see 39 passes here. Yeah, it's 39 passes. And so watching him back, I was like impressed by some things, but there were some things that still kind of scared me when it came to like Kyler Murray. So it's obvious that they're trying to get him to target the middle of the field more often. So what I am seeing about Kyler Murray is when he does do his drop back, he's kind of like moving in the pocket, like floating to try to get into those windows. And it's either making it so that the throws are like off target or they're late. So when I see those type of throws to myself, I think to myself, okay, like in this scenario, somebody who obviously can see over the offensive line or somebody that has better vision in that scenario is not moving to move around. Like it's not panning over to be able to make that throw because they're afraid of having the ball batted down or just not seeing the target overall. So once again, like, I don't know how that can be mitigated. That's why I want Marvin Harrison Jr. as a wide receiver, because that strengthens what Kyler Murray does well. And we see what Kyler Murray does well. So I'm going to go ahead and pick just at random right now, any type of throw. So I'll start with 11 right here. Oh, sorry. That's not the right screen. Let me get my other program that I really like. There we go. put the camera back up so I can see myself, and let's do this. So let's go. I picked 11. This is just random. I'm just picking out a random. All right. So empty set. Obviously, you have a 2x3 set or 3x2 set. You have Trey McBride at the very bottom.
Can you, Marcos, can you go and share your other screen? Looks like it stayed onto just the film lockup here. You should be able to, I think, at least get the right one added in. So thanks for waiting, at least those.
What the heck, man? I thought I had the right screen. Sorry about that.
All good. Oh, good. Sometimes sharing that window is always the best thing to do. Gotta love live podcasts.
All right, let me know if you see it.
There we go. Set, sir.
I'm over here explaining some things that you guys can't. Were you able to see like that last? Yeah, I think you were able to see that one. So, anyways, so empty set, 3x2. Let me go ahead and rewind.
You got one guy outside. You got two guys kind of lined up near the slot for the most part, and then on the right-hand side, it's an interesting setup where you got Trey McBride. Looks like he's split outside, and then it looks like Rondale Moore a shade inside. So Trey McBride is actually, I would say, is not necessarily like in the X spot, but it's basically where he's lining up for the most part, just for how that coverage is set up. It looks like you would say that that would be maybe more the Z for as far as for the play side. I think is looking like it's going to be to that right hand portion, Marcos.
Yeah, he's the Z because he's off the line of scrimmage. So you have like Michael Wilson, who's on the same side. He's on the line of scrimmage. So you would consider him either being the X in that situation, or you would consider Marquise Hollywood Brown. You always know that because you look at who's lined up at the line of scrimmage. I mean, obviously because of rules, and we all know how those rules can affect teams like the Kansas City Chiefs. Being lined up at the line of scrimmage, you can only have so many people. So let's go ahead and just play this out. By the way, I love how this app that I downloaded, I'm able to like just pause and go in. So he's just at his drop back. I believe this is the tight window throw that he throws to Trey McBride. So they bring him inside. They motion him right before the snap so that he can work outside and come back inside. I believe this is the throw. So no, this is not the throw. Oh man,
this was the one that where he was there. Yep. No, this one I do like. At least, like you said, the play call for this one though is very fun. You essentially are seeing pre-snap motion. You're able to move at least and get the receiver. And Rondale Moore has got kind of his path to the center. Trey McBride sits kind of down to be able to just kind of pick up a couple of yards for the most part, at least on that play. Kyler, of course, is looking at least to the left side all the way.
Yeah, I think it was just trying to target either Michael Wilson over the middle. Yeah, it was. So that's where the situation happened. So this is where my question mark comes in, because I'm not sure if he was trying to target Trey McBride, who did sit underneath. And that's what they're doing for Kyler Murray in these concepts. They will, for every quarterback in the NFL, they give him like that little, that quick stick route that either is going to get you a 7 or 8 yards or whatnot. But he's sitting underneath that zone. And he's like, pretty much, if he makes that throw in that window that he's supposed to make it through, which is right over here, he has Trey McBride for possibly like a 7-yard gain, which is a positive gain. Of course, the sticks are all the way over here, so they need to get deeper into that. And I believe he's trying to target Michael Wilson. So at least he's trying to attempt those throws over the middle. But, we have this situation where, of course, because of that situation with him in his size, he has an obstacle to overcome. And that's like the nose tackle that's like taking on the center in the situation, just putting his hand up there. That's all he needs to do, is just put his hand up there. Whereas, like, that's just something that, like, when it comes to Kyler Murray, we're just going to have to find or figure out ways to work around that, because if you want to succeed in the NFL, you do have to implement the middle of the field. Let's pick up another play. We'll do the 17 pass of the game. Okay, a little bit of play action, just a dump off. So that's a good decision right there. That's what I like. So people don't get excited about these type of throws. You don't need much to be able to convert and move the sticks on this one. This is a good decision by a quarterback. Whatever concepts are being ran down the field, they're meant to be able to sink the coverage. So you have both Michael Wilson and Hollywood Brown, like basically like clearing out this opening to the flat to Rondale Moore at the top of the screen, and now you have him lined up against a linebacker. I'll take that matchup any day. So making that decision right away, understanding that understands leverage. He understands that he has an advantage in that situation. He either makes that decision pre-snap. We'll find out in a second when I pause it again, but I just want to look at the end zone angle right here. fakes the handoff, looks over to his right side, dumps it off to Rondell Moore, gets a big gain out of that. That's a great decision. That's what you want to look at when you're evaluating the quarterback and their decision making. It's not always about deep throws down the field. It's not always about the pretty throws. It's about making the right decision. And as you saw, Rondell Moore is lined up in the backfield. So great decision right there. Let's go ahead and let me go ahead and pause it.
I think his eyes right there. If you want to go back real quick and look at where his eyes are, if you hit play for that spot, the one at least that I find interesting is, like you said, Rondale in the backfield. He fakes it, looks to see immediately, and he can see that you've got two guys running downfield with three. He's using his eyes to hold the linebacker, number 53, right there in the middle of the field. And knowing this concept, Rondale just flips around, at least reading it, to make sure he's got everyone there available on the sideline. Great decision ultimately, because if one of those guys had come down onto Rondale, then you're able to at least just read, take that deep shot. Seeing how Kyler's worked in different levels, I think, has been one of the biggest areas that I saw in this new offense right away versus the Cliff Kingsbury offense. You would see a lot of times it'd be like the running four verts. You're basically going to get a one-on-one matchup. You're predetermining the matchup. Here we get to see him kind of read high to low. He ends up holding 53 for a second and then is able to quickly dump off to pick up that first down plus some yards after catch.
Yeah, because you do know that the linebacker does know that there's two concepts being run behind him. So one of the things that I don't like about running play action from the shotgun is that these linebackers do not come down for that. They don't respect that. Look at the fake handoff. He just makes that quick read. He's not even paying attention to the running back. He's just already looking at the flat. But Kyler Murray is looking, what I presume is either at him or trying to hold him there with his eyes to be able to say, look, I'm going to target somewhere around you. Oh, look at that. Got a wide open Rondell Moore on the flat. Good luck trying to tackle him in space.
Yeah, no, it's a great way of isolating at least not just Rondell Moore and showing where by holding him in that spot. This is again like part of coverages will be if you're a linebacker, sometimes when you're reading, your goal is to be able to get in the way of the quarterback to be able to make sure that you can make it as hard as possible to complete that throw. Like you're going to be standing there underneath coverage, quarterback throws it over at linebacker who drop back, just jump up, tip the ball, intercept it. There's all sorts of possibilities that are there. That's one of those plays where you can at least say it's a good play design, and part of where the NFL with these two safety looks are, it's taking away those deep passing lanes. So you're going to have to be willing to kind of dink and dunk down the field. And that's where things with how the defense is constructed, at least here, your quarterback has to be able to make a good read very quickly. And that's exactly what Kyler did on that play.
Absolutely. Yeah, great decision once again. So you have him in the shotgun again right here. Single back formation. You have Hollywood Brown at the top of the screen. You have two wide receivers at the bottom. So you have a 4-by-1. You have an attached tight end at the end of that. Let's see how this plays out over here. Fake handoff. I thought this was going to be the gorgeous throw that he had. I believe he was trying to target Rondell Moore on this one.
Yeah.
On the kind of like the, how should I say, like not really the dig route, but like you see Rondell Moore at the bottom of the screen right there. I think he's trying to either target him, but he's looking downfield. And I believe, let's go back over here. Look at this part of the screen. Okay, so fakes the handoff. Rondell Moore runs that over route. He's wide open over here. You can say he's wide open. I think he's looking at Hollywood Brown, I believe. I don't know what you would get from this, but you have two wide receivers that are coming open, and you have Hollywood Brown, who I don't know if you can make that throw to him because of the safety that could possibly come down. What's your take on this one? Because this one's hard for me to read because I clearly can't see what he's trying to target here.
Yeah, this looks like great coverage by the Falcons, honestly. Like they basically, and sometimes that's where you have to be able to give it up to a defense where they set up the play action fake for the most part to Keontae Ingram. They actually get the pocket to move a little bit for the most part, where they move Kyler to the right, and then the idea is to throw back to the left. You're probably trying to hit that receiver in the middle of the field or with a Michael Wilson. Kyler ends up running out of time on the play. One of the areas that I think with the Cardinals, and you want to look at least, is they do a great job of being able to pick up, at least with, if you look at Jeff Swain and look at how the pass rush at least is set up, they do a solid job of being able to kind of give him a pocket. He scrambles a little bit here at the end, but the coverage downfield is so good that it would kind of lead to what you'd call a coverage sack. Like there's not really a place to go through. This is one of those deep shots where if you're a quarterback, sometimes you got to be able to, If you force the ball on there, that's going to be a picked off for an interception. You can't do that. I do think that the Falcons, and we've seen kind of this throughout some of their game, one of their players in Timmy Horn this last year did a really good job of being able to at least affect Kyler's throwing lanes by being able to get his hand in the air. I think that's one of the places that we've seen when you have a shorter quarterback. Part of the passing game has to be able to function off of having that under center play action, having some bootlegs. We've also been able to see here in this spot, you're obviously looking at the player that you'd want to get the ball to, I think, in this situation is pretty easily Rondale Moore. However, the way that if you're Kyler reading some of this spot at least is he's probably looking to see if he can get Hollywood Brown on the top side of that passing lane. Maybe we've seen Kyler be an aggressive quarterback. The fact of the matter is that the linebacker is able to kind of cover up that space very quickly. You see how he flips his hips around, number 55. When Rondale is kind of taking that spot, you'd want to see Rondale with his speed be able to get open. Instead, you see a combination of the linebacker takes a great angle. Kyler ends up having a little bit of pressure up at the front. And so then you're really going to be talking about the best thing that comes open late is going to be Michael Wilson. Because Rondale, at least that's the first spot you'd go to. The second spot you'd probably go to would be Wilson on that passing concept, throwing over the middle of the field. And by that point, you end up where Kyler, he doesn't have the capacity to step into that throw. Maybe you could argue that he could just be able to move his feet a little bit, wait for Wilson to be able to clear. This is one of those places where ultimately you would love to see, is there a guy that you would trust in a one-on-one type of matchup against this form of zone coverage? And what we've seen, at least with Kyler, if there's one thing I can say about him as a quarterback, it's that we saw him previously when you'd play man coverage, he would just beat you with the likes of DeAndre Hopkins, being able to get to the ball, even to an AJ Green. When teams have dropped back into this zone coverage and can still get pressure by running 3 or 4 guys, that's why so many NFL DCs are running this style of defense. You have to be able to find ways to build it. I think that in one of these different places, if you have the trust of a guy who can come up and be able to beat your man on one-on-one. And also the other thing I'd say about this play, Marcos, and this is something we've seen throughout the season, who's missing from this play? You've got Michael Wilson, Hollywood Brown, Rondale Moore, Jeff Swaim even is the guy who's tight end. Who's missing in this play? And the answer is a guy who I think you would trust to beat that one-on-one coverage, Trey McBride. And that's one of the cases I think to be made for bringing in a wide receiver one that would be able to beat that guy, where Kyler's not having to make a throw backwards across his body to a smaller framed Rondale Moore. We saw when they went to Trey McBride in this game and you were able to trust him, he was able to kind of come down with the game-winning catch, even on what was an underthrown ball. That's one of the places where what I've argued for the Cardinals is you can get some pass protection. I think you got to improve some of that. Obviously, there's going to be some room with the shorter quarterback, but this is one of those cases where we've seen it all the time with a guy like Mahomes or with other running quarterbacks when you're able to run and throw that ball to a guy who's able to get open or be able to take that ball away like a Travis Kelce or an A.J. Brown. We saw it with him and DeAndre Hopkins as well.
Well, he creates his own, like, he gives himself space on this pocket. He moves the pocket, quote unquote, because that's one of the things that I wanted to see from a mobile quarterback was being able to move the pocket. So he has all that space to be able to make that throw. And one of the things that I've constantly been watching about Kyler Murray is that, like, once he gets his feet set, he's a little bit indecisive of who's going to go throw. He has to make a commitment here. Right here's where the throw
He's
needs
still
to be
reading,
made.
still having to read that offense, at least. That's still new to him, yeah.
So if he can throw that ball to the corner where only Rondale can make it, he has the opening there. This is a tight window throw. I don't think that's a smart decision. Unfortunately, like, once again, like, he runs out of time. I think he does that pointing thing to try to pretty much say, like, hey, I'm hitting you. so make sure you get wide open. He's probably thinking about getting Hollywood to come down over here, but then he watches as AJ Terrell closes in on that because he has the deep third and he watches Hollywood Brown running that deep post route, that route that pseudo like go route over here. But the concept that they run here is like a flood concept / like a pseudo dagger at the bottom of the screen. These are meant to be able to attack one side of the field. So, of course, like, the decision needs to be made here. It wasn't made. They closed in the pocket. Kyler Murray has to bail. And right here, I would love to see him just get rid of the ball, like, because most of the time he tries to maximize all his throws. But I don't want to see him make that decision and then have it, luckily for us, DB missed the ball and dropped the interception. So I would say, like, he needs to get more into the whole mindset that, like, the play's lost. The play's lost. Don't make a bad
Yeah.
decision with it.
And
All right.
which down is this also, Marcos? I do want to make sure that we see the context for that, because this is a long first down to be able to get. Also, if you go back to the beginning, this is the Cardinals having to take a shot
Yeah, that's
because
true.
they are very far back. At least you can see at least where they took place. This is part of what I believe coming out of the half. Arizona's offense just kind of stumbled a little bit. It allowed the Falcons to get back into the game.
Yeah, and
And
no
that's
choice.
yeah. So, and that's where you took the concept, you took the shot, and that's one of the cases that we've seen with this Cardinals team is when you're on schedule and able to run the ball effectively versus when you're just kind of having to try to make things go through. Let's do one more play at least before we kind of get into the last part with our mock draft.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and get to our last place. So actually, I'm gonna let you choose. So out of 1 through 39, what pass do you want me to choose?
I honestly, at this part with the Falcons Cardinals, I think we should take a look at least here with one of the things with Trey McBride at the very end of the game. I think seeing that concept as one of the highlights. I
Okay,
think
so
for Cardinals fans, for the most part, to be able to line them up to get that game-winning field goal. And I believe,
that's
as far as the play-by-play goes, that it would
that's where he
be
gets the first down.
yeah, it'd be the one with the getting the first down. That was the one where Kyler ran for the first down. I know that the final play, at least for the most part, was actually going to be, oh, this is the 33-yard play. So if this is play number 39, you said?
Yeah, 39. This is it. This is the big time throw to Trey McBride.
There it is. All right, let's break this one down here.
I love this. I love how he goes down. He trusts his tight end over here because like after coming back for one game, he knows he has a very he has trust in this target, and this is where I started getting not only excited for Trey McBride because I was such a big Trey McBride fan when we drafted him. I thought to myself, oh boy, if we can develop this guy's going to be special. And I mean, he goes to him. He knows he has them one-on-one against a defensive back. That's a mismatch. And when you know that a quarterback understands it, like a tight end is gonna be a mismatch for a defensive back. You can't put a linebacker on him because he's too quick for him. You can't put a defensive back on him because look what he's gonna do. He's just gonna get him out of the way. He's gonna track the ball. He knows the ball's coming to him. He slows down for that. That's what I constantly say about like somebody like Hollywood Brown, where if Hollywood Brown's in that position, he's not fighting through contact. If you see Trey McBride keeps his eye on the ball, tracks it, stays with it. It's not even like something you have to high point. You just have to come back to it and make that adjustment. That was awesome. So let's go back to the beginning of it,
Yeah,
and
and
I'll play it out.
I've seen some people say if that was pass interference, but you also look at him trying to come back to the ball, and the cornerback is not looking back over there. A lot of times, what happens is with receivers, and this is kind of one of the areas of how pass interference can be left up to where the refs are going to basically want guys to be able to go and make a play on the ball. And so you can see he's got a step here for the most part. The ball is underthrown. He works his way back to the ball and is able to make that catch. That's one of those places where you're not going to throw a flag, especially because it's not like it's an underthrow and then the corner stopped him from getting back to the ball. This is just a play where the quarterback is just not able to kind of come through with being able to make a play, doesn't see where the ball is in the air. I believe the cornerback in this spot, unless I'm mistaken, is number 20. Is that number 27? Richie Grant, I think it is. From looking at it's Richie Grant. Like you said, one of the places of seeing how the Cardinals came out last year, we saw late in their game plan, it was run the ball with James Conner, throw the ball to Trey McBride, kind of mix in some of the smaller receivers because that was really what they had to work with. It's very easy to be able to see what Kyler does with a bigger receiver here in this spot, and it's a nice concept that kind of puts with the game on the line. You were in I believe this was a 2nd and 7. You're at Atlanta's 42. This is one of those places where you've got enough time left for the most part where the Cardinals, if they pick up a first down, you can at least have a shot. You can kick it. You don't get that play, you may not be able to actually, you're going to be then looking at 3rd and 7. You've got to go for it on 4th down. You're probably way too far to be able to kick it with Matt Prater from that point. So you're kind of in a got to have it sort of down situation, and for sure got to have it on the next down. And you're able to see the two come through with this, which is puts Trey McBride over that 100-yard limit, puts Trey McBride into the Cardinals being able to have that first 100-plus yard receiving game from a tight end in who knows how long, probably longer than I've been alive, I would say. And really feels like it was one of those places where you can see some of the future of the Cardinals of being able to run the ball effectively, take what the defense gives you, and then taking some of these big shots when the game is all set and ready to be
Uh,
won. You're getting those passes in.
One thing I want to add is looks like a cover one man coverage, and the deep safety shaded towards the field side, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of the field side because he's closer to these hash marks. So that's the reason why he didn't go up, because you got two go routes going up, like two post routes, so, or corner routes actually, I believe. So you have Hollywood Brown running from the slot, Trey McBride running from the slot. They're both running like corner routes here. So they're gonna fake inside, come back outside. He goes to Hollywood Brown because he pre-snap, he determines that this safety shaded towards Hollywood Brown, because they believe that that's the guy they need to stop. And he goes the total opposite way. That's the reason why that safety wasn't able to undercut. So it's a good thing to be able to understand that.
Yep. Great read by Kyler. Holds the one safety on the one side of the field. They actually run Trey McBride long side, which I don't think a lot of people, I wouldn't say not expected it, but you can at least see that they figure out what the mismatch is. He very quickly knows that's going to be his guy to go to. And McBride, for what it's worth, gets that step. It's part of investing in an early, more athletic tight end for the most part, and what that can do for you as a Arizona Cardinals player. Now, let's go ahead and shift into the last part, at least, of our show. We're going to be going over just with kind of a mid-combine mock. Thanks again, at least, for that film breakdown. Let's take a look at least here. So I've already done at least a little bit of the work. Let's say that the round at least shakes out like this. You get Caleb Williams going number 1 overall. Drake May goes at number 2. I think currently I would flip May, and I would flip him. I think that Jaden Daniels, when you talk about the Cliff Kingsbury style of offense with the deep throws, with being able to make use of the run game, working out of the shotgun, I think a lot of what you'd want to see for Drake May would be some of that deep play action off of center, being able to at least use his legs in that regard. Whereas Jaden Daniels is probably one of the better runners we've seen since Kyler and Lamar Jackson. I think that would shake out to be the first 3 picks, which of course I think left Marvin Harrison Jr. for the Arizona Cardinals there. I think you could say that we're still starving for Marvin is how that would work out for the most part. There's at least with how this mock draft shakes out, there's a couple of picks that I do also like in here, Marcos. I do like Brock Bowers as a tight end going at pick number 7. It's interesting seeing Quinion Mitchell go all the way up at least to the Falcons at number 8. We're not seeing, I think, at least the top quarterback in J.J. McCarthy go as high as I believe he will. Talise Fuaga is the guy who a lot of teams seem to be super high on. He here is the first tackle taken. I think that he more likely would be the second offensive tackle, maybe even the third. But for some people, he's leaped up high enough. Brock Bowers going as another receiver to number 7. I could see that very easily being the case. It'll be interesting to find out. You also get Byron Murphy's moved up there as far as pick 12 with the Broncos taking him. His athleticism, it seems like he could end up being one of the first defensive tackles taken. And the first edge off the board, Dallas Turner, followed by Laitu Latu, who his health records will be interesting. Jared Verse after that. We'll see what goes on with Kool-Aid McKinstry. I do think there's a chance he could fall to the second round with the Cardinals. Maybe the lack of, and this is a decent corner class, but really the biggest case of that you can make is for the offensive tackles. Another few go right here with Amarius Mims goes in the 20s to the Dolphins. You see Graham Barton go through Troy Fatanu. You also see Peyton Wilson. I think that this Marcos is going to be fascinating. He's probably in most drafts would be your number 1 inside linebacker. When you watch him play, he looks like a Luke Kuechly out there. His past shoulder surgery, injury, and some of the other places means that he could end up going as early as sometime on day 1 or day 2. I don't think he goes first round, even if that is kind of the traits that he's blown up the combine, obviously. I think it'd be more likely somewhere around day or day 2 at like the earliest. I think that you may see a team take him day 4, or maybe he ends up falling all the way as a 7th round pick with those medicals. But unfortunately for Cardinals fans, right after that, you already see Jackson Powers Johnson, the top setter, goes off of the board to the Eagles in replacing Jason Kelce. Yep, JPJ. You then have, of course, this is a great tackle class, and unfortunately for the Arizona Cardinals, they fly off the board. J.C. Latham, Amarius Mims. He's a huge human being. I call him Amarius Hims just because he is just that type of a bit raw, but he would be like your type of prototypical right tackle. Graham Barton from Duke, Troy Fatanu, at least off of Washington goes. You now have the Arizona Cardinals on the clock at pick 27. Troy Franklin goes to the Buccaneers. You got a couple of great options here. So you've got at this spot Johnny Newton. You've got a safety in Tyler Nubin. We talked a little bit about what the Cardinals would have with Budda Baker. I do not see them taking a safety at this spot. They're hoping, I think, that one of the top cornerbacks could fall to them. Here it would be Ennis Rakestraw Jr. maybe would be one of those. I just think that when you're taking a look at this, what immediately stands out to me is the tackle spot, offensive and defensive. Johnny Newton's one of my top 3 defensive tackles in this class. I think that you could make an argument that he could be the top overall tackle up there with Byron Murphy. You could also sell me on another type of tackle, at least in, I think it was, there's another defensive tackle who's going to be pretty high. 366 pounder, Devondre Sweat. I think the other guy from Texas, you could argue that he could be another one up there. Tyler Guyton, a guy from Oklahoma, Kyler Murray's alma mater, where he won the Heisman's up there. Zach Frazier, a guy who could be a center or a offensive interior lineman. What are some of your thoughts based on who's available? You also have a couple of trade options. You could move back a few picks with the Detroit Lions would be one spot. New Orleans Saints, you would have to trade a ways back for the most part here. What I think would be interesting would be if the Lions are offering you, their next pick is at pick 29. You could you move back 2 spots for the most part for the 92nd overall pick, Marcos? Do you think that would be something that'd be worthwhile for the Cardinals, or do you want to stick and pick and draft a player here in this scenario?
Well, none of these people are really jumping like off the screen when it comes to, and that's how it is in the draft. Like your top guys are going to be gone early. So can I afford to move back? Yeah, I can afford to move back. I mean, we all know that that's like going to be something that Monty Ossenfort's going to do. He's going to entertain the phones. He's going to listen to offers. He's just going to try to, hit this with numbers and whatnot. And we still got to, you still got to develop the picks and, have them play out and stuff. So it's not just like, hey, I got more picks. That's great. But it's only 2 spots back for an extra pick. So I'd go ahead and trade back in this situation.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if you're the Lions, I could see them in this spot moving up because right now I don't think it'll be like this on draft day. There have been only 3 quarterbacks taken. Here they would be moving up for another guy who falls. And, maybe we've seen draft day falls happen before where sometimes there's a quarterback 4 who slides down enough a team is able to trade up at least. I think that you would definitely see this as being a solid option. Right here, you can see at least where Tyler Nubin and then Tyler Guyton comes off of the board. So if you're looking at a left tackle for the Arizona Cardinals, he does go at least to Buffalo 1 pick there in this scenario from PFF's mock draft simulator. I think at this spot, honestly, Marcos, you take Johnny Newton right here and you recognize that now you've at least got a stud defensive tackle who's able to stand there in the middle of the field. He does have some pass rushing upside at least as well. I think it's pretty easy now to be able to say you can take him. Now, what's cool is I also am looking at this spot and saying, all right, you've got a pick coming up in 35. You've got a couple of other teams that are up here for the most part. I would draft Johnny Newton, and then the Cardinals in this spot are going to be probably being able to look at a potential trade up. So in this spot, I would look at if you're the Cardinals, you can see at least how the rest of the first round went. You've got Chris Braswell goes at pick 32 to the Chiefs. I would see if you could trade up and get that 5th-year option in. Now you're at least talking about at least getting in an edge rusher. In this case, we're not going to be making trades for the most part. You've got Ennis Rakestraw Jr., you've got Zach Frazier, you got TJ Tampa. You also have a couple of interesting options here now at the Cardinals. You've got a Jordan Morgan, who a lot of people have wondered, could he be that left tackle you'd want to line him up as? His arms are a bit shorter. We know the Cardinals have talked to them, have an interest in him. You also have a couple of edge rushers here. You've got Chop Robinson and Darius Robinson still on the board. Chop Robinson, I believe, is one of those guys who at the Combine just had a very solid being able to get that rush in. You have Kamari Lassiter, had a blazing 3-cone at the Combine. I believe that's Kwame Lassiter's kid needing for a cornerback. And you're also talking about, of course, you still need that left tackle. Do you want to go ahead and focus on the offensive side of the ball? Are you taking maybe an edge rusher to go with that? Or are you trying to focus at least on filling that cornerback spot? What are some of your thoughts here from the talent available, Marcos?
Well, once you told me that Jordan Morgan was a short arm type of a player in the NFL, those type of people are called guards. So
Mhm.
if you're comfortable with trying to take a guard and possibly moving them to the left, like to as left
Yeah.
guard, that would probably be the only option I would go for. But I don't know. I don't feel comfortable about playing him in tackle because if you have a short arm tackle, you lose advantages against these long armed edge rushers. So I wouldn't be comfortable about putting him in tackle now that I know that little bit of information.
Yeah.
So, like, I
Let's take a
mean, the
look
biggest
here what we
receiver.
have for some of those. We've got the Tennessee Titans at least are looking to potentially trade. The Atlanta Falcons, if you want to jump back a little ways, for the most part, the Dallas Cowboys. I think it'd be interesting to see what we would have. Can we get another pick, at least for the most part, with a fourth rounder, with how that stacks up? We've got pick number 38 and 35. We are going to look at the Cardinals. Let's say that they give back, move up a little bit for the most part. Let's say they give up pick 222, move back 3 or so spots, and let's see what we get. The Titans are actually going to move up. They take Rakestraw, Frazier to have an edge rusher. So here at this spot, we're talking about what do we have here? We've got Kamari Lassiter, Chop Robinson, Darius Robinson. I don't feel like that the Cardinals have a number one edge rusher. I think that looking at this here, if you're to talk about who is one of the top guys that you could get, that would be one of the players that I would look at for the most part. So you got Chop Robinson. He runs in the 4.4s, which is insane. 250, 6'3". That's basically, imagine Marcus Golden's size with the athleticism of like a wide receiver. So you're talking about very athletic play. Obviously, Penn State is just known for some of those freak athletes. And then Darius Robinson. This is a guy who overall at 296, at about 6'5", he's one of those kind of prototypical 4-3 edge rushers. In this spot, Marcos, I'm thinking of Hassan Reddick. This is a guy who maximized his potential with Jonathan Gannon, a little bit on the smaller size. I would go ahead and take the likes of Chop Robinson here for the most part if I'm the Cardinals,
I agree.
and at least get that edge rusher in. So now you've got at least two guys on the defensive line. You've got a bit of a pass rush. You got a bit of a run stopping. Let's go back now and look here at pick 66 for the Arizona Cardinals. Again, no trades are taking place in this mock draft. To me, this is pretty easy to look at a combination of skills. Kalen Bullock is there. Jalen McMillan's there. I don't think you need to look at a wide receiver. Maybe you could look at a defensive lineman again. There's one player that really stands out for me here, and it's Blake Fisher, the Notre Dame tackle. I think that he's one of those guys that at 6'6", 312 is prototypical size, prototypical strength. I think that the one thing with Blake Fisher is that he does seem like he is going to be a natural athlete, at least who's strong. I don't know if he's going to last this long into round 3. I think he may be one of those round 2 offensive tackles in a good offensive tackle draft. To me, I bet would be my plan. You couldn't get one of the top first round tackles at 27. They just didn't fall. You traded back and you couldn't get one with Tyler Guyton. You're like, okay, we'll go on the defensive side. Cardinals have plenty of defensive needs. I think you take Blake Fisher here. You have a veteran offensive tackle, put him and kind of groom him to be the left tackle or the right tackle of the future. Do you have any issues with taking a Blake Fisher here, or is there any other prospects you see that you would feel pretty strongly about if the Cardinals do end up trading Buda Baker? You're getting a pick. Maybe a Kalen Bullock isn't too bad of an option to take here, but I think you could address this left tackle spot long term with the likes of Fisher.
This is where I like to try to dabble with like tackles and whatnot in the second and the third round. So I have no I am not I'm not protesting that pick at all. I think that's a great pick in the third round, especially if he has the upside of being like the starting left tackle for us, or at least a starting tackle for us. Whatever they decide to do with Paris, if they keep him at right or they move him to left, which I mean, it all depends on how this guy gets developed. But yeah, I think this is a great pick.
Oh, it looks like it took Johnny Wilson instead on the actual mock draft simulator, but that's all right. We know that we'll have Blake Fisher there at the end. So now we get to this is pick 71. The Cardinals in this scenario have 6 picks in like the first 90. It's just crazy how I think there's 5 picks in the first 90, 6 in the first 120, which is just a lot of draft capital. This is kind of a curious spot for the most part. As we said, this is a top wide receiver draft. You've got guys like Devontae Walker still here. Austin Booker is an edge rusher. You've also got Xavier Leggett, who is a lot smaller. He weighed in the 160s. He's going to be a lot closer, honestly, to a Hollywood Brown. Actually, no, Leggett's the one who's the bigger X type of receiver, 6'3". I was thinking at least of there's a different lineman, different wide receiver who went much earlier in the draft at receiver. I was thinking of, give me a quick second here. Not Adonai Mitchell, but the other one, who I believe was from Texas. Sorry, folks, it'll come to me here in just a second. Xavier Worthy, that's who it was. Xavier Worthy, much smaller guy. Do you think that it's worth taking a second receiver? You've already spent draft capital on Michael Wilson. He seems like he'll be able to be your overall wide receiver 2. I don't think you necessarily need to get a big slot. I honestly would be looking around in this range if you wanted to add a second tight end, if you wanted to add at least a player of safety. The one player that really stands out to me here now that we've drafted a tackle is going to be Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Stands out to me quite a bit here. You could go with another defensive lineman, but really, I would much rather say we need to invest and get a guy who either can take over long term, for there's only 1 year left of the deal for Mr. Kaiser White. And you also can see at least there's a halfback here. There's a couple of places. This may be where a running back could start to go for the Arizona Cardinals. Some guys that are still on the board, obviously, are Jalen Wright, Blake Corum. Some of the guys afterwards are a little bit smaller. What are some of your thoughts, at least, Marcos, here on what the Cardinals should do? Because I'm looking at that linebacker spot. I'm also looking at the need for a cornerback, looking at some of the guards who are available. And right now, it feels like in a lot of different ways, the other guy that stands out to me here, and I've got another pick coming up, not until pick number 90. If you're talking about wanting to really invest in your defense or your offense, if you want to be balanced, I think there's 2 players I would look at here. One, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who is another Clemson linebacker, but unlike Isaiah Simmons, I think he actually is a true linebacker. He's a little smaller at 6 foot 230. He does at least remind me a lot of Kaiser White. He's a pretty good aggressive player. The other player here that I think would maybe be my pick is Christian Mahogany. So we passed earlier in the draft on a offensive interior lineman. We did get a tackle. He's a kind of one of those plug and play sort of guards that you can look at in that third round, 6'3", 322. A bit on the older side at 23, but he's going to be at least 24 by the end of his rookie season, so it's not like he's too old. Do you feel like the Cardinals should go toward addressing that linebacker starting position, getting a guy next to Kaiser White, or would you kind of maybe risk it a little bit, see if Mahogany falls, or like even a Cedric Van Pran on the interior? What would be your choice, Marcos, in this situation?
I would. Sorry, I thought it was on mute. I would just go with Jeremiah Trotter. He's a smaller linebacker. I'm looking at his measurables. He's 6 foot 228. That's completely fine in today's NFL. 31 and 1/2, like 31 and a half inch arm length and stuff. That's not. He's a pretty undersized like linebacker, but I was mostly trying to see if I could pull up his 40 time to see if he's one of the faster linebackers, because you do have to take somebody that you believe is going to be a starter for the next upcoming like decade and whatnot. And being that his dad, once again, we're looking at like lineage and whatnot. His dad was also a linebacker, so him himself playing that inside linebacker position and going with the defense and whatnot, I would hope to see that like there's a good possibility that he might carry on those traits. So yeah, I would go with Jeremiah Trotter here and hope that he takes on that spot and becomes a starter. It needs to be a starter right off the bat. Like let's not play around with this guy.
I think working.
We don't have Vance Joseph anymore, so we don't have to worry about him coming off the bench.
Yeah, I think with Jeremiah Trotter also, he did have a 7-second 3-cone at least for that size. And for the most part, a lot of linebackers these days are much more coverage linebackers. I agree with you that it'd be nice to have a 240-pounder who could just stand in the middle and be able to take guys on. It's just really hard to find those levels of athletes these days. Let's go ahead and grab him and see how things shake out, at least as far as falling. Now, again, we see Christian Mahogany goes off, Devondre Sweat goes. We have the Cardinals back on the clock now. We've got a guard in Mason McCormick. You've got a safety in Sione Vaki. The guy that really stands out to me here, honestly, Marcos, there's 2 of them. One, do you feel like Cedric Van Pran is that guy who could he take over long-term and be an upgrade at center from a guy who's a gritty, more undersized player here? This is Van Pran, is 6'4", 310. Some people talked about him as the top center in the class. He's fallen down. You've got Michael Hall Jr., another solid defensive lineman. It seems like there's always a third-rounder who goes from Ohio State who ends up being pretty good. Hall is 6'2", 280. That would be getting you another kind of guy who could be defensive inside or outside. Here's what I will say. I know that we've already talked about the other cornerback from Mizzou who went much earlier in the NFL draft, especially in this draft, And there is another one. And Chris Abrams-Drain, who is actually, in my opinion, might be a bit better. He's at 5'11", 178, a little bit bigger size. I think that he's got the ability to play as an outside corner. He may not be your cornerback one, but if you can find a cornerback 2 or 3, pair that with a guy that you already drafted last year with the Arizona Cardinals, at least in, I believe it was the out of Syracuse. We're talking about, let me find this here real quick. Um, Garrett Williams, obviously. Yeah, so you already took Garrett Williams. You have Keitrell Clark as another guy who obviously you had some hopes on that he could be able to either be a backup or come in for the 4 spot. I would take Chris Abrams-Drain right here and recognize that you at least have a cornerback who's able to hold up, be a corner 2 or 3 for you. What are some of your thoughts, at least, Marcos, on where the Cardinals are? And even with the board and how it has fallen, we've kind of seen at least some of those guys, at least, who we'd hope like a Mahogany that would be on the board just kind of came off of it just before the Cardinals picked. Same with the Devondre Sweat. Even one of the top running backs in Jalen Wright and Blake Corum have gone off the board here.
Well, obviously the talent is starting to like have a drop off here. Chris Abrams is interesting as a like cornerback too. Obviously, like I'm not a fan of the size.
Yeah, he's not like your 6
He's
foot
like very
corner, at least
lightweight
with
at
long arms.
175
Yeah,
and 5'11.
yeah.
Just trying to get as much as you can. And like, mm-mm. Yeah, but like I would take a flyer on him and whatnot and have him, you do need to start supplementing that talent with the cornerbacks in that room to be able to like at least, get some development going and whatnot. So I would go with Chris Abrams at this point. Yes.
Yeah, let's go with that, especially because, like you said, after this, I do think that the cornerback rooms, if you're taking a look at here, after Jarvis Brownlee Jr., it's going to have a drop off for the most part. They got Andrew Phillips. I like some pieces with Cam Hart, but obviously, we've seen Kalen King. No one's seen his stock go from first round to second round to probably day 3 pick just because of, despite being at a great place for athletes at Penn State. I'll take Abrams-Drain here, and let's get down to, we're back at pick 92 on the clock. This one's pretty fun, honestly, to me. I don't think you need to go ahead and take a running back this early. You've got some good options on the board here, at least. I think you wait for the next pick for the most part. One of the guys that I like in this spot here would probably be Van Pran. You got an interior offensive lineman. We know we've already at least gotten an offensive tackle in this spot. We've gotten a linebacker. We're addressing plenty of needs for the Cardinals. I would love to say that we could either get him or get another defensive lineman here in Hall Jr. What would your thoughts be on this, Marcos?
I would probably go with maybe just Michael Hall Jr. in this situation because we got to start supplementing that defensive line like a group.
Yeah.
But Cedric Van Pran is also very interesting. What would you say in this situation? Would you rather go and bolster the offensive line or try to bolster the defensive line?
Yeah, I think in this spot, if you're set on your center for a year, then maybe you could argue, okay, we draft him, but unless Vin Pram's going to plug into left guard, I bet the Cardinals will sign a veteran left guard. Adding a young talent on the defensive line, I think would be my goal here because then you can keep that rotation going. Jonathan Gannon said he would not see one defensive lineman play 65 snaps a game. Probably not going to see a defensive lineman play more than 65% of the snaps in a game. I'd take Michael Hall here all the way to the bank. You're now going to be dropping ways down for the most part past some of these guys here to look at. I'm going to go ahead real quick past this spot. Here's where I'm at pick 105. I like Cade Stover a lot out of Ohio State. We've already seen the Cardinals kind of invest quite a bit with Ohio State players here, starting with Marvin Harrison Jr. You've got also a couple of halfbacks. Leonard Taylor's seen his stock go from kind of late first round, early second down a little bit. To me, if you're talking about building the Cardinals overall, I would, and this is something we know about the Cardinals, what we've heard is that they're probably going to be looking at a veteran free agent to bring in. Obviously, a torn ACL for tight end too. Adding another guy in Cade Stover, who I think is a good, willing blocker, is able to be showing up all over in their run game. I would take him here without a hesitation, knowing that as a Cardinals fan, you're going to want to be able to recognize the importance of Trey McBride, but also recognize the importance of having these two tight ends. And if Trey McBride goes down, having that option. I would go ahead and just take Cade Stover here in this scenario.
I agree that I would. Yeah, I definitely would. Like I said, we're getting to the bottom round, so now it's like, hey, we got to snatch up what everything for value wise.
Oh yeah. All right. So now you got a couple of guys left. You got another corner in Cam Hart. I don't think that we've got probably 3 or 4 corners at least there with the Cardinals. We've got a couple of guys. There's Audric Estime is interesting. He had us 4.740, but at 5'11, 227, he's a big guy. James Conner, I believe in his combine ran somewhere in the 4.6s. You've got Leonard Taylor, another. We've already kind of gotten, I think, some of our defensive linemen. You've got a guy in Ray Davis who overall is probably just kind of an okay back. He's just a little bit shorter at 5'10. This is a spot where what I'm looking at here is I think that the Cardinals, you've got a number 1 running back in James Conner. You've got a number 2 running back, I think, that's popped up for the most part, not just with Amari DiMercato, but with Michael Carter, the second coming over. I think you'd be looking for more of a long-term option to replace James Conner. I think that getting another back with burst is probably not as favorable here. I think you look at some of the other players, even with like a Cam Hart, who does measure in at 6'2", 207. He's one of those guys who maybe is a bit more stiff, but he's a cornerback with size. I think that there's 2 areas that I would go here. One is I would take a look either at a Braylon Allen. I don't think I would draft a quarterback here at all with one of these spots. He's going to be a guy who's 6'2", 245 with burst like a James Conner. Or you could take a look here at a guy in Cam Hart with that cornerback spot. I think we should go ahead here and take Cam Hart with our final pick. Would probably be at least finally addressing and getting a corner with size. Or do you think the Cardinals should draft that big running back to replace James Conner in a year, get some extra boost to the offensive side?
I like the corner because we do need some cornerback with like some size at the very least. And let's not forget that like Tariq Woolen went in the 5th round with the size and speed and whatnot. So we need something to work with as far as a cornerback room to be able to be like somewhat of that Antonio Hamilton, like either like a replacement and or just somebody that's going to play under him, because Antonio Hamilton has been our most consistent cornerback, and he's a cornerback with size.
Yeah. So here we have our final kind of mock draft that we built up here before as far as the Cardinals are concerned. I think we did a really good job. You got Marvin Harrison Jr., you got Jerry Newton, you've got Chop Robinson, obviously the one that was clicked on incorrectly, at least as far as Johnny Wilson, instead of that we do have for the, let me make sure I take a look at the full results here to make sure I know who we actually drafted. After Chop Robinson, we went and got, I believe it was Blake Fisher, actually, of Notre Dame. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. was, of course, the cornerback linebacker that we took after that. And then as far as the last piece of draft, we also ended up taking, let me go here. There we go. For the Cardinals, we also grabbed Chris Abrams-Drain here, the cornerback. Got Michael Hall Jr., at least defensive lineman, Cade Stover to help that backup tight end, and Cam Hart, who I think is going to go a lot earlier, at least in some of this, because of that size-speed combo, ran a 4.540. That's it for us. We'll come back at least talking a little bit more about the Combine and a free agency preview next week. Marcos, if you want to shout out where our listeners can find you, either for your writing or work on the X machine.
You can find me at Pancake Soul, and of course, you can find me on AZ Sports Underground.
Absolutely, and I'm at Blake Murphy 7. Thanks again for tuning in. This has been the Redbird Reboot Podcast. We've been here for an hour 43 minutes for our Combine special. It's time for us to log off. Take care, everyone.
Have a good one, guys.